you make it clear technology is what's going to help us solve this problem. But at the same time, technology is what's also making the problem worse in perpetuating the misinformation that climate change is a hoax on social media. How frustrating is that for you?
Well, I'm not sure how much. I know in the case of the pandemic, there's a lot of crazy conspiracy things out there, and that, is widespread and affecting mask use and openness to vaccination. In climate, yes, we're probably likely to get that, particularly as we succeed in getting governments to, have aggressive policies, understanding why some people don't see this problem or feel a need to deny the problem. I think we have to be, very thoughtful about who will they trust to be convinced, who could go out and look at these coral reefs or, look at the heat wave or, just look at the model. It shows that, the beaches in lots of places will be gone. This is because it's a multi-decade task. Being shrill may not be the way to get going. So lots of education, and that's part of the goal of the book, is to get people talking about, wow, if we were going to commit, there should be a real plan, not just, things that seem effective, like, divesting this stock or that stock, and which is a fine thing to do if people feel like that, but it's not. To actually reduce the emissions, you have to change the way you make steel. There's just no kind of metric or divestment or, blocking traffic that alone will get rid of those emissions.
So you've never just wanted to pick up the phone and call Mark Zuckerberg and say, hey, this is really slowing me down?
Well, Mark, he's got to maintain kind of an open platform, and, on vaccine things, they've, stepped up to try and get the egregious stuff out of there. I have a good dialogue with Mark. I think he's been put in a hard position in terms of what the government rules or what a company should do to let debate continue while you have the really extreme stuff that drives people into sort of a non-reality position. How do you distinguish those things, and who's supposed to do that, when you have millions of messages every hour?
At the same time, you recently said you think Trump should and eventually will be let back on Twitter. Why support that when he spreads so much misinformation about issues like climate and vaccines, which you care about?
Well, there's a question whether labeling things is better. I mean, those messages are likely to show up somewhere. It's a country with a First Amendment. And so, do you want to have one party have one social network and the other party have another social network? This, unlike climate, where I'm in talking to the best scientists and funding it, the way we draw the boundaries on social networking, I don't have that solution, but I know that we need very smart people at Facebook and universities trying to say, how do you draw the line there? I haven't seen a proposal where you go, wow, if you do that, then it's as open as it needs to be and the crazy stuff goes away. And I look at every idea. So, I think this is a societal challenge.
Now, while you're pouring money into vaccines, some of your peers are pouring money into rockets. And I'm curious, do you think Earth will ever be more uninhabitable than Mars? Is this really what's going to save the human race?
Well, I think we should preserve this planet and make it hospitable to human life. The idea of Mars or even artificial planets, it's great that other people are doing that, but I'm not involved in that. I don't see that as part of the solution. I don't think I'm missing something there. But, you're talking about, when you're talking about Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, they're in the climate game and in a constructive way, which I'm at least glad that they're putting some of their resources in this direction.
So speaking of Elon, you've said we need hundreds of Elon Musks, and with Tesla's expansion in places like China and India, that's only going to increase their carbon footprint. Should Tesla be more upfront about that?
Well, Tesla reduces your carbon footprint. And if they get, an electric car, as we convert the electric generation to be zero emissions, is one of the few categories that, we see a path to zero. Now, it's only about 7% of emissions come from passenger cars globally. And so you can't declare victory there. But, as the cost of those cars comes down, the range goes up, the charge points are more numerous and standardized and quick charging, you'll feel like, yes, a gasoline car, less maintenance, quieter. The market will eventually take care of this. And so you won't need regulations, even though they've been used, including a tax credit, to get the volume up, to get to that point. And so every category needs to go through that process of bringing its green premium down dramatically.
Now, I understand you own a Porsche electric car yourself. Elon has in the past claimed you shorted Tesla, and I wonder if there's any truth to that.
Well, I think Tesla's an amazing company. I wish I'd, been more on the long side, but I, it's great. And I have lots of relatives who own Teslas that I've helped buy for them. So nothing but positive thoughts about Tesla and its role.
Now that said, I'm curious for your thoughts here, because Tesla could potentially make more money from its Bitcoin investment this year than profits from electric cars in all of 2020. What's your take on that? What's your Bitcoin take, and the fact that the price can just go up or down based on a simple tweet from him?
Well, look, Elon has tons of money and he's very sophisticated. So, I don't worry that, his Bitcoin will sort of randomly go up or down. I do think people get bought into these manias who may not have as much money to spare. So I'm not bullish on Bitcoin. And, my general thought would be that, if you have less money than Elon, you should probably watch out.
Why aren't you bullish on Bitcoin?
Look, there are things we invest in society that produce output. Bitcoin happens to use a lot of energy. It happens to promote anonymous transactions. They're not reversible transactions. The Gates Foundation does a lot in terms of digital currency, but those are things where you can see who's making the transaction. So digital money is a good thing. And there's a different approach that's local currency and attributed, and deals with all the money laundering and terrorism type regulations, and yet gives you the very the convenience and the low cost of transaction. And so our foundation is very proud that in the pandemic, a lot of the countries we funded to do this were able to get money out to their citizens very, very efficiently. So that's something that it's not got the visibility of Bitcoin, but the move towards digital money that we're very engaged in is a super positive thing that eventually will get to even the poorest countries.
So let's talk about the pandemic. Obviously, your other big focus, in addition to climate change, the US just hit 500,000 deaths. And I just wanted to take a moment there. How does that number strike you?
Well, it's unbelievably, it's, more than any war we've been in, except the Civil War. It's enough that I'm sure it's touched almost everybody. We count on government to both before something bad happens and when something bad happens to protect us. And it didn't work in this case. So, hopefully it's a lesson going forward about investments in global health that the US and the US cooperating with other countries need to get done to be ready for the next pandemic.
How concerned are you about the new variants and vaccines keeping up?
Well, amazingly, our foundation was studying 3 vaccines and trials in South Africa when the variant showed up. And so we were able to gather really detailed data showing that, they all still had some beneficial effect, but particularly Novavax and Johnson, even though they worked a little less well, were still a great tool there. And so weirdly, the US didn't sequence enough to see its variants like the UK and even what we funded in South Africa. Now that's being remedied, just another miscue by the country that should have done the best job. So we'll get on top of the variants. We may need to tune the vaccines. All the manufacturers are looking through how quickly they could get that done. It'll add to the transmission and deaths, but if we get vaccination rates up, only by at most a month or two.
Are Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson doing enough to prioritize populations in developing countries? And what's the ideal shot for the developing world?
No, the private sector, including those 3 companies, did a fantastic job. We've been backing the mRNA approach for about a decade now. Sadly, it's not that mature, and so you can't scale it up as much as we'd like, nor is it cheap. And so the vaccines 3 through 5, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, and Novavax, can be scaled up through Indian factories to a higher degree. So for developing countries, those 3 and sending the right ones to the right place will be most of the solution, not to take away from anything that Pfizer, who funded its work, or Moderna did. But those will mostly land in rich countries.
So at this point, what are the biggest headwinds that you see in the vaccine manufacturing process?
Yeah, well, every day there's a complex discussion about, okay, do we have enough glass vials for fill finish? Do we have all these different ingredients that come from different countries? I do think some of the, vaccine nationalism, where people are trying to look good in their own country by somewhat blocking things going around, there's huge downside in that. We need to get the vaccines out in large numbers. We need to end this epidemic globally. And from the beginning, the voice of the foundation is included not only moving faster, but this equity question. And over the next 4 or 5 months, the world can behave well. It's mostly governments now that are limiting how much we can help countries that don't have vaccine factories.
Now, so many people ignored the COVID warning signs, didn't wear masks, still aren't wearing masks. And I'm curious, looking in your crystal ball, do you see something about human nature that will prevent us from being prepared for the next pandemic, that will prevent us from avoiding the climate disaster that you're so concerned about?
Well, it's a real test of humanity to invest in advance for problems that come later. And with the pandemic, I have no doubt we will make the investments, because it's billions, and now everyone has got this personal experience, not just the trillions that were lost, but many negative things way beyond that. So absolutely, the rich countries, including the US, will be ready, will make the investments and be ready. The climate change is tougher without that young generation constantly reminding people that we need to accelerate these changes, accelerate this R&D, then we'll fall short. And so this is one that we really need a lot of advocacy. But I think if you look at the trend lines, it's likely to be there. Normally, when you have a pandemic, people ignore things way out in the future. But with climate, the last year, there's actually been an increase in activism in both parties.